There's a reason why the most successful people in the world work in complete silence, while everyone else is busy making noise about their plans. There's a reason why billionaires, world-class athletes, and industry leaders rarely announce what they're working on until it's already done. And there's a reason why the people who talk the most about their goals are usually the ones who achieve the least. What I'm about to share with you will completely change how you approach success, productivity, and personal development. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to tell you. Every time you seek external validation, every time you announce your plans, every time you work for applause instead of results, you're sabotaging your own potential. Most people are addicted to the feeling of being seen, being praised, being acknowledged for their efforts. But what they don't realize is that this addiction is the very thing keeping them from achieving anything meaningful. While they're busy posting about their workout, the person who will actually get in shape is silently grinding in the gym. While they're announcing their business idea to everyone who will listen, the person who will actually build a successful company is quietly executing in private. By the end of this video, you'll understand why silence isn't just a strategy, it's a superpower. You'll learn the psychological mechanisms that make private work exponentially more effective than public work. And most importantly, you'll discover how to build an internal system so strong that you'll never need external validation again. This isn't about becoming antisocial or hiding from the world. This is about developing the kind of mental strength and focus that separates the top 1% from everyone else. This is about becoming the type of person who gets results instead of getting likes. Chapter 1. The validation trap that's destroying your potential. Here's something that will shock you. The human brain gets the same dopamine hit from talking about a goal as it does from actually achieving it. When you tell someone about your plan to start a business, to get in shape, to learn a new skill, your brain receives an immediate reward. It feels like you've already accomplished something, even though you've done absolutely nothing. This is called social reality bias. And it's one of the most dangerous psychological traps that ambitious people fall into. Your brain doesn't distinguish between the satisfaction of announcing a goal and the satisfaction of completing it. So when you share your plans, you literally trick yourself into feeling accomplished before you've even started. Think about it. How many times have you felt excited and motivated after telling someone about your latest project or goal? How many times did that excitement fade within days, leaving you wondering where your motivation went? This isn't a coincidence. You gave away your motivational energy in exchange for temporary social validation. But the damage goes deeper than just lost motivation. When you make your goals public, you unconsciously shift your focus from internal satisfaction to external approval. Instead of working because the work itself is rewarding, you start working for the recognition. Instead of measuring success by your actual progress, you start measuring it by how impressed other people seem. This creates a devastating cycle. You do a little work, then immediately seek validation for that work. You share your progress, get your dopamine hit, and then lose momentum because your brain thinks you've already been rewarded. Meanwhile, the person working in silence doesn't get that premature reward. So they keep working until they achieve actual results. Every successful person understands this principle, even if they can't articulate it. Warren Buffett doesn't announce his investment strategies before he executes them. Elon Musk builds rockets and cars in private facilities before revealing them to the world. World-class athletes train in private for years before competing publicly. They understand that the energy you spend seeking validation is energy you're not spending on execution. The validation trap is particularly dangerous in our social media age. People have become addicted to the instant gratification of shares, likes, and comments. They post about their gym session before they've even finished their workout. They announce their business idea before they've even written a business plan. They share their goals as if the sharing itself is an achievement. But here's what they don't realize. Every time you seek external validation, you're essentially asking permission to feel good about yourself. You're giving other people control over your emotional state. You're making your confidence dependent on their approval. This is the opposite of the mental strength required for real success. The most dangerous part of the validation trap is that it feels productive. When you talk about your goals, when you post about your progress, when you seek advice and feedback, it feels like you're doing something important. Your brain interprets these social activities as progress toward your goal. But in reality, they're taking you further away from it. Consider the psychology of what happens when you announce a goal. First, you get immediate social recognition for your intention, which reduces your motivation to follow through. Second, you open yourself up to opinions, doubts, and discouragement from others. Third, you create external pressure that transforms intrinsic motivation into performance anxiety. Fourth, you shift your identity from someone who achieves to someone who talks about achieving. This is why most New Year's resolutions fail within weeks. People announce their resolutions publicly, get their social validation, and then unconsciously feel like they've already done something worthwhile. The brain's reward system has been activated prematurely, killing the drive that would have fueled actual progress. Successful people understand that there's a finite amount of mental energy available for any given goal. They can either spend that energy seeking approval, or they can spend it on execution. They choose execution every single time. They understand that the satisfaction of surprising people with results is infinitely more rewarding than the fleeting pleasure of impressing people with plans. Chapter 2. The Neuroscience of Silent Excellence. Your brain operates fundamentally differently when you work in private versus when you work for an audience. This isn't just philosophical, it's neurological. When you're working in silence, your brain activates what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a state that promotes deep thinking, creativity, and intrinsic motivation. When you're working for external validation, your brain shifts into social cognition mode. Instead of focusing purely on the task, part of your mental resources are constantly dedicated to imagining how others will perceive your work. This divided attention dramatically reduces your cognitive performance and creativity. Studies show that people who work in private exhibit stronger activation in the brain's reward centers when they complete tasks. Their brains release more dopamine from the intrinsic satisfaction of accomplishment. People who work publicly, however, become dependent on external sources of dopamine. Their brains literally rewire themselves to crave social approval rather than personal achievement. This neurological difference explains why some people can work for hours without needing breaks, while others constantly seek distractions and validation. The silent workers have trained their brains to find satisfaction in the work itself. The public workers have trained their brains to find satisfaction in other people's reactions to the work. But the neuroscience goes even deeper. When you work in silence, your brain enters what psychologists call a flow state more easily. Flow is characterized by complete absorption in an activity, where time seems to disappear and performance reaches its peak. This state is almost impossible to achieve when part of your mind is focused on how others will judge your efforts. Silent work also activates the brain's intrinsic motivation pathways more strongly. When you're not working for external rewards, your brain develops stronger neural connections associated with curiosity, mastery, and purpose. These are the psychological drivers that sustain long-term effort and lead to breakthrough achievements. Consider what happens neurologically when you share your progress on social media. Your brain releases a small amount of dopamine when you post, anticipates more dopamine from likes and comments, and then either gets a larger hit if the response is positive, or experiences disappointment if the response is poor. This creates an addictive cycle where your brain starts craving the next social media interaction rather than the next work session. Meanwhile, the person working in silence builds what neuroscientists call frustration tolerance. Their brain learns to persist through difficult periods without external reward. This neurological adaptation is crucial for achieving anything significant, because all meaningful work involves periods where progress feels slow or invisible. The brain also processes setbacks differently when you work in private. When you fail privately, your brain focuses on problem solving and learning from the experience. When you fail publicly, your brain focuses on managing social embarrassment and protecting your reputation. This difference in mental processing dramatically affects how quickly you can recover from mistakes and continue progressing. Another crucial neurological difference involves what psychologists call locus of control. People who work in silence develop an internal locus of control, meaning they believe their outcomes are determined by their own actions. People who work publicly develop an external locus of control, meaning they believe their outcomes are determined by other people's opinions and reactions. This might seem like a subtle distinction, but it has profound implications for mental resilience and long-term success. When you have an internal locus of control, setbacks feel temporary and controllable. When you have an external locus of control, setbacks feel permanent and overwhelming because you feel powerless to change other people's perceptions. The neuroscience also explains why silent workers tend to be more innovative. When you're not constrained by what others expect or approve of, your brain is free to explore unconventional solutions. You're not unconsciously limiting yourself to ideas that will be socially acceptable. This cognitive freedom is essential for breakthrough thinking. Silent work also develops what neuroscientists call cognitive endurance. Just like physical muscles grow stronger with resistance training, mental focus grows stronger with sustained private effort. People who work in silence for extended periods literally develop thicker prefrontal cortexes, the brain region responsible for sustained attention and self-control. Chapter 3. Why announcing your goals guarantees failure. When you announce a goal publicly, you're not just sharing information, you're fundamentally changing the psychological dynamics of achievement. You're transforming a personal journey into a public performance. And that transformation is almost always fatal to success. Here's the brutal truth. Announcing your goals satisfies your need for recognition before you've earned it. Your brain receives social acknowledgement for your intention, which reduces the psychological tension that drives action. This isn't a character flaw, it's basic human psychology. Your brain is designed to seek the most efficient path to feeling good. And if talking about goals provides that feeling, why would it motivate you to do the actual work? But the damage of goal announcement goes far beyond reduced motivation. When you make your goals public, you invite other people to become stakeholders in your journey. Suddenly, your progress isn't just about you anymore. It's about maintaining your image, managing other people's expectations, and dealing with their opinions about your methods and timeline. This external pressure fundamentally changes how you approach the work. Instead of focusing on effective strategies, you start focusing on strategies that look good to others. Instead of measuring progress by objective results, you start measuring progress by whether other people seem impressed. Instead of adjusting your approach based on what's working, you become locked into the version of the plan you announced publicly. The psychology of public commitment also creates what researchers call performance anxiety. When you know people are watching and evaluating your progress, your brain shifts from learning mode to performance mode. In learning mode, mistakes are valuable feedback that help you improve. In performance mode, mistakes become threats to your reputation that must be avoided at all costs. This shift from learning to performance is devastating for skill development. All meaningful growth requires experimentation, failure, and adaptation. But when you're performing for an audience, you become risk-averse. You stick to strategies you know you can execute rather than strategies that might be more effective but involve a higher risk of visible failure. Consider what happens when you announce a goal and then encounter obstacles. If you were working privately, you could quietly adjust your approach, change your timeline, or even pivot to a different goal entirely. But once you've announced your intention publicly, making changes feels like admitting failure. So instead of adapting intelligently, you double down on strategies that aren't working. Because changing course would require public acknowledgement that your original plan was flawed. The social psychology of goal announcement also invites unwanted advice and discouragement. As soon as you share your goal, everyone becomes an expert on your situation. They start telling you why it's too difficult, why you should try a different approach, or why they know someone who failed at something similar. Even well-meaning friends and family can undermine your confidence with their concerns and suggestions. This constant input of other people's opinions creates mental noise that interferes with your ability to develop your own judgment about what's working. Instead of learning to trust your instincts and adjust based on your direct experience, you become confused by conflicting advice and uncertain about your own perceptions. The timing aspect of goal announcement is particularly damaging. Most people announce their goals at the very beginning of their journey, when they're feeling most motivated and optimistic. But beginnings are when you know the least about what you're actually going to encounter. The goal you announce in January might need to be completely reimagined by March, based on what you learn through execution. But if you've announced the January version publicly, you feel locked into it. You feel like changing course would make you look inconsistent or uncommitted. So you persist with an outdated plan rather than evolving intelligently based on new information. Public goal announcement also creates what psychologists call identity foreclosure. When you announce that you're going to become a successful entrepreneur or get in the best shape of your life or master a new skill, you're not just stating an intention, you're claiming an identity. Your brain starts to invest in maintaining that identity rather than doing the work required to earn it. This is why you see people who talk constantly about being entrepreneurs but never actually start businesses, or people who identify as fitness enthusiasts but rarely exercise consistently. They've received social validation for the identity without having to demonstrate the behaviors that would actually create that identity. The most successful people understand that goals are private contracts with themselves, not public promises to others. They work toward their objectives in silence, adjusting and adapting as needed, until they achieve results worth sharing. They understand that the energy spent managing other people's expectations is energy not spent on execution. They also understand that surprising people with results is infinitely more satisfying than impressing people with plans. When you work in silence and then reveal your achievements, people are genuinely impressed because they see concrete evidence of your capability. When you announce goals and then fail to achieve them, people learn to discount your future announcements. Chapter 4. The compound effect of invisible work. Most people dramatically underestimate the power of work that nobody sees. They think that if effort isn't recognized, acknowledged, or applauded, it somehow doesn't count. But the opposite is true. Invisible work is the most powerful work because it compounds without the friction of external expectations and social pressures. When you work in silence, every ounce of energy goes directly into improving your skills, building your systems, and moving toward your objectives. There's no energy wasted on managing your image, explaining your progress, or dealing with other people's opinions. This efficiency advantage might seem small on any given day, but over months and years, it creates an enormous gap between silent workers and public workers. Think about compound interest in finance. A small difference in interest rate seems insignificant in the short term, but over decades, it creates dramatically different outcomes. The same principle applies to focused effort. Working in silence might only make you 5 or 10% more effective on any given day, but that advantage compounds exponentially over time. Consider two people with identical goals, identical starting points, and identical capabilities. One person works publicly, constantly sharing progress and seeking validation. The other works privately, channeling all energy into execution. In the first month, their results might be similar, but after a year, the silent worker will be significantly ahead. After 5 years, they'll be operating in completely different leagues. This happens because invisible work develops what psychologists call deep practice. When you're not performing for an audience, you can focus entirely on the aspects of your craft that need improvement, even if those aspects are boring or unglamorous. You can spend weeks working on fundamentals that won't impress anyone but will make you significantly better. Public workers, on the other hand, tend to focus on aspects of their work that are visible and impressive. They work on the parts of their craft that photograph well, that sound good in conversation, that generate social media engagement. But these aren't necessarily the parts that create real skill development or meaningful results. The compound effect of invisible work is particularly powerful in skill-based fields. When you practice a musical instrument in private, you can focus on the technical exercises that are necessary but not entertaining. When you practice publicly, you tend to focus on pieces that showcase your current abilities rather than pieces that stretch your capabilities. This principle applies to every area of development. The entrepreneur working in silence can focus on building systems and solving real problems rather than networking and pitching. The athlete training in private can focus on their weaknesses rather than showcasing their strengths. The student learning in silence can focus on understanding difficult concepts rather than appearing smart in class discussions. Invisible work also compounds because it develops what researchers call intrinsic motivation. When your only reward comes from the satisfaction of improvement itself, you become addicted to getting better. Your brain starts craving the feeling of mastery rather than the feeling of recognition. This internal drive is sustainable indefinitely because it doesn't depend on other people's attention or approval. Public workers, by contrast, become dependent on external motivation. They need encouragement, acknowledgement, and validation to maintain their effort. But external motivation is unreliable and finite. Other people get bored with your journey, distracted by their own lives, or simply overwhelmed by the constant updates about your progress. The compound effect is also accelerated by what psychologists call deliberate practice. This is focused, uncomfortable effort designed to push you beyond your current capabilities. Deliberate practice is inherently private because it involves making mistakes, looking incompetent, and struggling with challenges that are beyond your current skill level. When you practice deliberately in public, you feel pressure to perform at your current level rather than push beyond it. You become reluctant to attempt things that might make you look bad, even if those attempts would accelerate your development. This reluctance to risk public failure significantly slows your rate of improvement. The mathematics of compound improvement are staggering. If you improve by just 1% per day through focused private effort, you become nearly 40 times better over the course of a year. Most people don't achieve this kind of improvement because they're constantly interrupting their work to seek validation, explain their progress, or manage other people's expectations. Invisible work also compounds because it develops pattern recognition and intuition. When you're deeply focused on your craft without external distractions, you start noticing subtle patterns and connections that others miss. You develop what experts call domain-specific intuition, an almost unconscious understanding of what works and what doesn't in your field. This intuitive understanding can't be developed through public work because it requires sustained, uninterrupted focus. When you're constantly switching between execution mode and explanation mode, your brain never develops the deep pattern recognition that separates experts from amateurs. The compound effect is why silent workers often seem to achieve sudden, overnight success. From the outside, it looks like they came out of nowhere. But in reality, they've been steadily improving in private for years, building skills and systems that weren't visible until they reached a critical mass of capability. Chapter 5. Building an unshakable internal compass. The ability to maintain direction and motivation without external validation is perhaps the most crucial skill for achieving anything significant. Most people are like ships without anchors, constantly drifting based on the winds of social approval and disapproval. But the highest achievers develop what I call an internal compass, a psychological system that keeps them oriented toward their true objectives regardless of external circumstances. This internal compass isn't built overnight. It's developed through deliberate practice of self-reliance, through repeatedly choosing your own judgment over other people's opinions, and through learning to find satisfaction in your own progress rather than in other people's recognition of that progress. The foundation of an internal compass is clarity about your values and objectives. Most people never take the time to clearly define what they actually want versus what they think they should want, based on social expectations. They pursue goals that sound impressive rather than goals that are meaningful to them personally. This misalignment between true desires and stated goals makes it impossible to develop genuine internal motivation. To build a real internal compass, you must first spend serious time in solitude, away from the influence of other people's expectations, honestly examining what you actually want from your life. Not what would impress your parents, not what would look good on social media, not what would make you seem successful to your peers, but what would actually create a sense of purpose and satisfaction for you personally. This process of honest self-examination is uncomfortable because it requires confronting the gap between your authentic desires and the image you've been projecting to the world. Many people discover that they've been pursuing careers, relationships, and lifestyles that don't actually align with their core values. But this discomfort is necessary for developing genuine internal motivation. Once you have clarity about your true objectives, you must learn to measure progress using internal metrics rather than external validation. This means developing your own standards of quality, your own definitions of success, and your own methods for evaluating whether you're moving in the right direction. Internal metrics might include skills developed, problems solved, systems built, or personal growth achieved. These metrics are often invisible to others, but they're more reliable indicators of real progress than external measures like recognition, income, or social status. Building an internal compass also requires developing what psychologists call emotional self-regulation. This is the ability to maintain emotional equilibrium regardless of external circumstances. When you depend on other people's approval for emotional stability, you become vulnerable to manipulation and distraction. When you can maintain emotional balance through your own internal resources, you become psychologically independent. Emotional self-regulation is developed through practices like meditation, journaling, and regular solitude. These practices teach you to observe your emotions without being controlled by them, to find peace within yourself rather than seeking it from external sources, and to maintain perspective during both successes and setbacks. The internal compass also requires developing confidence in your own judgment. Most people constantly seek advice, feedback, and validation because they don't trust their own ability to make good decisions. But confidence in your judgment is built through making decisions, observing the results, learning from mistakes, and gradually becoming more accurate in your assessments. This process requires accepting that you will make mistakes and that mistakes are valuable sources of information rather than character flaws. When you're not afraid of making wrong decisions, you become more willing to trust your instincts and act on your own judgment. Building an internal compass also involves developing what researchers call intrinsic motivation. This is motivation that comes from the satisfaction of the activity itself, rather than from external rewards. When you find genuine enjoyment in the process of improving, creating, and achieving, you become independent of other people's recognition or approval. Intrinsic motivation is developed by focusing on activities that naturally engage your curiosity and interest, by setting challenges that are difficult but achievable, and by regularly reflecting on the satisfaction you derive from your own progress and growth. The internal compass must also include a long-term perspective that extends beyond immediate social feedback. Most people make decisions based on short-term social consequences rather than long-term personal outcomes. They choose paths that will be immediately approved by others rather than paths that will create lasting satisfaction and achievement. Developing a long-term perspective requires regularly imagining yourself 5, 10, or 20 years in the future and honestly evaluating whether your current choices will create the life you actually want to live. This long-term thinking helps you resist the temptation to make decisions based on immediate social approval. The strongest internal compass also includes what I call selective indifference. This is the ability to genuinely not care about other people's opinions on matters that don't affect them. When you become selectively indifferent to social approval, you free up enormous mental and emotional energy that can be redirected toward meaningful achievement. Selective indifference doesn't mean becoming antisocial or inconsiderate. It means recognizing that other people's opinions about your personal choices are usually more about them than about you, and that seeking approval for every decision is a form of psychological dependency that prevents authentic self-expression and achievement. Chapter 6. The Art of Strategic Invisibility. Strategic invisibility is not about hiding from the world or avoiding all social interaction. It's about becoming selectively visible only when visibility serves your objectives. It's about understanding that attention is a finite resource, and every moment you spend in the spotlight is a moment you're not spending in deep work. The most successful people in history understood this principle intuitively. They worked obsessively in private, building their skills and creating their masterpieces away from public scrutiny, only revealing their work when it was ready to make maximum impact. They understood that premature visibility often kills great projects before they have a chance to reach their full potential. Consider the psychology of what happens when you work publicly. Every decision becomes a performance. Every strategy must be justified to an audience. Every setback becomes a public failure that requires explanation and damage control. This constant performance pressure fundamentally changes how you approach your work, shifting your focus from effectiveness to appearance. When you practice strategic invisibility, you free yourself from these psychological constraints. You can experiment with unconventional approaches without worrying about how they'll be perceived. You can fail quickly and cheaply without managing public embarrassment. You can pivot and adapt based purely on what's working rather than what looks consistent with your public image. The art of strategic invisibility begins with understanding the difference between productive visibility and vanity visibility. Productive visibility serves specific purposes: attracting customers, building partnerships, recruiting talent, or sharing valuable knowledge. Vanity visibility exists only to feed your ego and generate social validation. Most people engage almost exclusively in vanity visibility. They share their daily routines, their workout plans, their reading lists, their productivity systems. None of this serves any practical purpose other than generating likes and comments. Worse, it broadcasts their strategies to competitors and invites unwanted advice from people who haven't achieved what they're trying to achieve. Strategic invisibility requires developing what I call selective disclosure. This means carefully choosing what information to share, with whom, and when. Instead of broadcasting everything to everyone, you share specific information with specific people who can help you achieve specific objectives. For example, instead of posting about your business idea on social media, you might share it privately with potential mentors, customers, or partners who can provide valuable feedback or support. Instead of announcing your fitness goals publicly, you might work with a personal trainer who can help you achieve them more effectively. This selective approach to sharing information has multiple advantages. First, you get higher quality feedback because you're talking to people with relevant expertise rather than random social media followers. Second, you avoid the psychological trap of premature validation. Third, you maintain competitive advantage by keeping your strategies private until you're ready to execute them publicly. Strategic invisibility also involves understanding the timing of revelation. Most people reveal their work too early, when it's still rough and incomplete. This early revelation invites criticism that can discourage continued effort and suggestions that can derail your original vision. Strategic invisibility means waiting until your work is strong enough to speak for itself. The timing principle applies to every type of project. If you're building a business, you reveal it when you have paying customers and proven systems, not when you have an idea and a business plan. If you're developing a skill, you reveal it when you can demonstrate competence, not when you're still learning the basics. If you're working on personal transformation, you reveal it through your results, not through your intentions. This approach to timing creates what psychologists call the revelation advantage. When you reveal high-quality work that nobody expected, people are genuinely impressed because they see concrete evidence of your capability. When you reveal plans and promises, people become skeptical because they've heard similar promises before from people who didn't deliver. Strategic invisibility also protects you from what researchers call social interference. This is the tendency for other people's opinions and expectations to unconsciously influence your decisions and behaviors. When you work publicly, you become susceptible to groupthink, peer pressure, and external validation seeking that can pull you away from your original vision. Working invisibly allows you to develop what I call authentic voice. This is your natural approach to problems and challenges, unfiltered by social expectations or conventional wisdom. Authentic voice can only be developed in private, through extensive experimentation and reflection, without the influence of other people's preferences and biases. The development of authentic voice is crucial for creating breakthrough work. All significant innovations come from people who were willing to ignore conventional wisdom and follow their own insights. But these insights can only emerge when you're free from the psychological pressure to conform to other people's expectations. Strategic invisibility also involves managing your energy and attention as finite resources. Every interaction with other people about your work requires mental energy that could be spent on the work itself. Every social media post requires time and attention that could be directed toward meaningful progress. When you practice strategic invisibility, you become highly protective of your mental resources. You realize that your ability to focus deeply and work consistently is your most valuable asset, and you guard it accordingly. You become selfish with your time and energy, not out of antisocial tendencies, but out of recognition that these resources are required for meaningful achievement. The most powerful aspect of strategic invisibility is that it creates what I call compound mystery. When people don't know what you're working on, they become curious. When they occasionally see evidence of your progress without understanding the full scope of your efforts, they become intrigued. When you finally reveal significant results, they're genuinely surprised and impressed. This compound mystery creates a psychological effect where people assume you're more capable than they previously thought. They start to wonder what else you might be working on in private. They begin to see you as someone who gets things done rather than someone who talks about getting things done. Strategic invisibility ultimately transforms your reputation from someone who has good intentions to someone who delivers unexpected results. This transformation in how others perceive you creates opportunities and advantages that are impossible to achieve through conventional self-promotion. Chapter 7. Systems for Sustained Solo Execution. Working alone for extended periods without external accountability or social support requires a completely different set of systems than working in public with constant feedback and encouragement. Most people fail at solo execution because they try to use social strategies in solitary environments, or they assume willpower and motivation will be sufficient to sustain long-term effort. The reality is that sustained solo execution requires carefully designed systems that replace the psychological functions normally provided by social interaction. You need systems for motivation when you don't feel like working, systems for feedback when nobody is watching, systems for accountability when you're only answerable to yourself, and systems for momentum when progress feels invisible. The foundation of any solo execution system is what I call environmental design. Your physical environment profoundly affects your psychological state and your ability to maintain focus over extended periods. When you work alone, your environment becomes your primary source of behavioral cues and emotional regulation. Environmental design begins with creating a dedicated workspace that is optimized for deep work rather than comfort or social interaction. This space should be free from distractions, properly lit and ventilated, and organized in a way that minimizes decision fatigue. Every element of your workspace should either support focused work or be eliminated entirely. The psychological principle behind environmental design is that your brain automatically adapts to environmental cues. When you consistently work in the same optimized environment, your brain begins to associate that space with focused productivity. Eventually, simply entering that environment triggers a mental state conducive to deep work. But environmental design extends beyond your physical workspace to include digital environment management. When you work alone, you're particularly vulnerable to digital distractions because there's nobody else around to maintain social pressure for focus. This means you must be ruthless about controlling your digital environment. Effective digital environment management includes using apps that block distracting websites, keeping your phone in another room during work sessions, using a separate device for work that doesn't have entertainment applications, and designing your digital interfaces to minimize the cognitive load of simple tasks. The next crucial system for solo execution is what I call structured autonomy. This is a framework that provides the benefits of structure and accountability, while maintaining the flexibility and independence that make solo work attractive. Structured autonomy involves creating personal deadlines, progress milestones, and performance standards that are just as demanding as external requirements, but are self-imposed and self-monitored. Structured autonomy requires developing what psychologists call self-regulatory skills. These are the mental abilities that allow you to monitor your own performance, adjust your strategies based on results, and maintain effort toward long-term goals, even when immediate rewards are not available. Self-regulatory skills are developed through deliberate practice of self-monitoring. This means regularly tracking your progress, analyzing your performance patterns, identifying what's working and what isn't, and making systematic adjustments to improve your effectiveness. Most people avoid this kind of self-monitoring because it requires honest self-assessment. but it's essential for solo execution. Another critical system is what I call motivation independence. When you work in public, other people's enthusiasm, encouragement, and expectations provide external motivation that helps you persist through difficult periods. When you work alone, you must generate this motivation internally through systematic practices. Motivation independence is built through understanding your personal motivation triggers and designing systems that activate these triggers consistently. Some people are motivated by progress tracking, others by challenging goals, others by meaningful purposes, and others by competitive benchmarks. The key is identifying your specific motivation patterns and building systems around them. For example, if you're motivated by progress visualization, you might create detailed tracking systems that show your improvement over time. If you're motivated by challenge, you might set increasingly difficult milestones that push your capabilities. If you're motivated by purpose, you might regularly remind yourself of the larger meaning behind your work. Solo execution also requires developing what I call feedback independence. In social environments, other people provide constant feedback about your performance, helping you stay calibrated and adjust your approach. When working alone, you must create systematic feedback mechanisms that serve the same function. Feedback independence involves developing objective metrics for measuring your performance and regular practices for analyzing those metrics. This might include weekly performance reviews, where you assess what you accomplished, what you learned, and what you want to improve. It might include regular testing of your skills to ensure you're actually improving rather than just putting in time. The most sophisticated feedback independent systems include what researchers call deliberate practice protocols. These are structured approaches to skill development that involve identifying specific weaknesses, designing exercises to address those weaknesses, getting objective feedback on your performance, and continuously adjusting your approach based on results. Another essential system for solo execution is what I call energy management. When you work alone for extended periods, you don't have the natural energy breaks that come from social interaction. You don't have meetings, conversations, or collaborative activities that provide mental variety and emotional stimulation. This means you must deliberately design energy management practices that prevent burnout and maintain sustainable productivity. Energy management involves understanding your natural energy rhythms and designing your work schedule around them. Most people have specific times of day when they're most mentally sharp, and other times when they're better suited for routine tasks. Solo execution requires matching your most important work to your peak energy periods and using low energy periods for maintenance tasks. Energy management also includes designing recovery practices that restore your mental and emotional resources. This might include physical exercise, meditation, time in nature, creative activities, or social interaction scheduled specifically to recharge your batteries for solo work. The final crucial system for solo execution is what I call momentum preservation. When you work alone, there's nobody else around to help you restart when you lose momentum. If you have a bad day, get distracted, or encounter obstacles, you must rely entirely on your own systems to get back on track. Momentum preservation involves creating what I call minimum viable progress standards. These are the smallest possible actions you can take on difficult days that still maintain forward movement toward your goals. The principle is that it's easier to maintain momentum than to recreate it from zero. Momentum preservation also includes developing what psychologists call implementation intentions. These are pre-planned responses to common obstacles and setbacks. Instead of improvising when you encounter difficulties, you have predetermined strategies for getting back on track quickly. Chapter 8. Mental Frameworks for Handling Isolation and Doubt. Working in silence inevitably brings you face to face with two psychological challenges that derail most people's solo efforts: The isolation that comes from working without social support, and the doubt that emerges when you can't validate your progress through external feedback. These challenges are not character weaknesses. They're predictable psychological responses to solitary work that require systematic mental frameworks to overcome. The isolation challenge is particularly difficult because humans are fundamentally social creatures. We're evolutionarily designed to seek group membership and social validation. When you choose to work in isolation, you're essentially fighting against millions of years of evolutionary programming that associates solitude with danger and group exclusion with death. Understanding this evolutionary context is crucial for developing effective frameworks for handling isolation. Your brain's discomfort with prolonged solitude isn't irrational. It's adaptive. But this adaptive response is designed for survival in social groups, not for achievement in modern environments, where deep work often requires extended periods of solitude. The first mental framework for handling isolation is what I call productive solitude reframing. Instead of viewing isolation as loneliness or social rejection, you learn to frame it as protected time for deep work and personal development. You transform the narrative from "I'm alone because I'm avoiding people" to "I'm alone because I'm choosing to invest in my future." This reframing requires conscious practice because your default mental patterns will tend toward the negative interpretation. You must deliberately remind yourself that your solitude is temporary, voluntary, and purposeful. You're not isolated because you're incapable of social connection. You're isolated because you're disciplined enough to prioritize long-term achievement over short-term social pleasure. Productive solitude reframing also involves recognizing that different types of people require different amounts of social interaction to function optimally. Extroverts typically need more frequent social contact, while introverts often find prolonged social interaction draining. Understanding your own social needs allows you to design isolation periods that challenge you without overwhelming you. The second framework for handling isolation is what I call delayed social gratification. This involves consciously postponing social rewards until after you've completed significant work. Instead of using social interaction as a distraction from difficult tasks, you use it as a reward for completing them. Delayed social gratification requires developing what psychologists call impulse control around social desires. When you feel the urge to text a friend, check social media, or engage in casual conversation, you acknowledge the urge without immediately acting on it. You promise yourself social interaction after you've completed a predetermined amount of work. This framework transforms social interaction from a distraction into a motivation tool. Instead of social needs interfering with your work, they become incentives that drive you to complete your tasks more efficiently. The social interaction becomes more enjoyable because you've earned it through productive effort. The third framework is developing what I call internal social connection. This involves building a rich internal dialogue that provides some of the psychological benefits normally derived from external social interaction. Internal social connection includes practices like journaling, self-reflection, and imaginary conversations with mentors or role models. Internal social connection is not about replacing real relationships. It's about developing the psychological self-sufficiency that allows you to work alone for extended periods without feeling completely isolated. When you have a strong internal dialogue, you can process thoughts and emotions without immediately needing external validation or feedback. The doubt challenge is equally predictable and potentially more destructive than isolation. When you work in silence, you don't have the constant external feedback that normally helps you calibrate whether you're making progress or wasting your time. This absence of feedback creates space for doubt to grow, often to the point where it paralyzes further effort. Doubt becomes particularly intense during what researchers call the valley of despair. This is the period in any learning or achievement process where you've moved beyond beginner's enthusiasm, but haven't yet reached visible competence. You're aware enough to recognize how much you don't know, but not skilled enough to see clear evidence of progress. The first framework for handling doubt is what I call evidence-based self-assessment. Instead of relying on feelings or other people's opinions to evaluate your progress, you develop objective metrics that provide clear evidence of improvement. These metrics might include skills practiced, problems solved, systems built, or specific capabilities developed. Evidence-based self-assessment requires identifying leading indicators of progress rather than just lagging indicators. Leading indicators are measurements that predict future success, while lagging indicators only confirm past results. For example, if you're learning a skill, leading indicators might include hours of practice, specific techniques mastered, or complexity of problems you can solve. Lagging indicators might include income earned or recognition received. Focusing on leading indicators helps you maintain confidence during periods when lagging indicators aren't yet visible. You can see clear evidence that you're moving in the right direction even when external results haven't materialized. The second framework for handling doubt is what I call historical progress review. This involves regularly reviewing your development over extended time periods to gain perspective on your actual rate of improvement. When you're focused on daily or weekly progress, improvement often feels slow or invisible. But when you compare your current capabilities to where you were 6 months or a year ago, progress becomes undeniable. Historical progress review requires maintaining detailed records of your work and capabilities over time. This might include work samples, performance measurements, reflection notes, or skill assessments. The key is creating objective documentation that allows you to see your development trajectory clearly. The third framework for handling doubt is what I call productive uncertainty tolerance. Instead of viewing uncertainty and doubt as problems to be eliminated, you learn to see them as natural and even beneficial aspects of ambitious work. All meaningful achievement involves venturing into uncertain territory where success is not guaranteed. Productive uncertainty tolerance involves developing comfort with not knowing whether your current approach will work, whether you're progressing fast enough, or whether your ultimate goals are achievable. You learn to persist through uncertainty by focusing on process rather than outcomes, effort rather than results, and learning rather than performance. This framework requires shifting your identity from someone who needs to know they're going to succeed to someone who's committed to discovering what's possible through sustained effort. You become more interested in the experiment than in predicting the results. The fourth framework is developing what I call doubt as information, rather than doubt as identity. When doubt arises, instead of interpreting it as evidence that you're not capable of success, you interpret it as information about potential obstacles, skill gaps, or strategy adjustments that might be needed. This reframing allows you to use doubt productively rather than being paralyzed by it. When you feel doubt about your progress, you ask specific questions. What evidence am I looking for that I'm not seeing? What skills might I need to develop? What assumptions might I need to question? What feedback might I need to seek? Chapter 9. How to transform solitude into competitive advantage. While most people view solitude as a necessary evil or a temporary sacrifice required for deep work, the highest achievers understand that solitude itself can become a competitive advantage. When you learn to thrive in solitude rather than merely endure it, you develop capabilities that are impossible to cultivate in social environments and gain access to mental states that create breakthrough thinking. The competitive advantage of solitude begins with the simple fact that most people are uncomfortable with extended periods of alone time. In a world where everyone is constantly connected, constantly stimulated, and constantly seeking external validation. The person who can work effectively in isolation has access to mental resources that others cannot tap. This advantage compounds because the problems worth solving, the skills worth developing, and the projects worth completing all require sustained attention that is impossible to maintain in social environments. While others are fragmenting their attention across multiple conversations, meetings, and social interactions, you're developing the kind of deep focus that produces exponential rather than linear results. The first way to transform solitude into competitive advantage is through what I call depth amplification. When you're alone for extended periods, your mind naturally moves from surface-level processing to deeper levels of analysis and synthesis. Without the constant interruption of social interaction, your brain can maintain focus on complex problems for hours at a time. This sustained focus allows you to see patterns and connections that are invisible to people working in social environments. You can hold multiple variables in your mind simultaneously, explore nuanced relationships between ideas, and develop insights that require extended contemplation. These insights become competitive advantages because they're unavailable to people who never create space for deep thinking. Depth amplification also allows you to develop what researchers call domain expertise more rapidly than people who divide their attention between work and social interaction. When you can focus intensively on skill development without social distractions, you progress through the stages of competence much faster. The second transformation involves developing what I call creative solitude. This is the ability to use alone time not just for execution but for genuine innovation and breakthrough thinking. Creative solitude requires learning to be comfortable with mental uncertainty, allowing your mind to wander and explore without immediately seeking external input or validation. Most people are uncomfortable with the mental uncertainty that precedes creative breakthroughs. They immediately seek other people's opinions, research what others have done, or look for external validation of their ideas. But breakthrough thinking requires spending extended time with uncertain, incomplete, or unconventional ideas before they're ready for social evaluation. Creative solitude allows you to explore ideas that would be dismissed or discouraged in social environments. You can pursue unconventional approaches, experiment with seemingly impractical solutions, and develop original thinking without the pressure to immediately justify your approach to others. The third transformation is developing what I call strategic patience. In social environments, people tend to optimize for immediate social rewards rather than long-term results. They choose strategies that will be immediately appreciated by others rather than strategies that will be effective over time. Solitude allows you to develop strategies and approaches based purely on their long-term effectiveness rather than their immediate social appeal. You can choose difficult paths that won't be understood or appreciated by others until the results are evident. This strategic patience often leads to approaches that are superior to conventional wisdom but would be impossible to pursue in social environments. Strategic patience also allows you to maintain focus on objectives that require years of sustained effort. While others are constantly pivoting based on social feedback and changing trends, you can maintain consistent direction toward long-term goals that may not be fashionable or immediately understood. The fourth transformation involves what I call intuitive development. When you spend extended time alone with your work, you develop a kind of intuitive understanding that transcends conscious analysis. You begin to sense what approaches will work before you can articulate why. You develop instincts about your field that allow you to make rapid decisions without extensive research or consultation. This intuitive development is impossible in social environments because it requires sustained, uninterrupted engagement with your domain of expertise. When you're constantly switching between execution mode and social mode, your brain never develops the deep pattern recognition that creates intuitive expertise. Intuitive development becomes a competitive advantage because it allows you to move faster than people who need to analyze every decision consciously or seek input from others before acting. You can trust your instincts because they're based on extensive solitary practice and observation. The fifth transformation is developing what I call independent judgment. In social environments, people's opinions are constantly influenced by groupthink, social proof, and the desire to maintain relationships. Even when they try to think independently, they're unconsciously adjusting their perspectives to align with social expectations. Solitude allows you to develop genuine independent judgment because you're free from immediate social pressures. You can evaluate ideas, strategies, and opportunities based purely on their merit, rather than on how they'll be perceived by others. This independent judgment often leads to contrarian positions that prove to be correct over time. Independent judgment becomes a competitive advantage because most valuable opportunities and insights are contrarian by nature. If everyone recognized them as valuable, they would already be exploited. The ability to recognize value that others miss requires freedom from social consensus. The sixth transformation involves what I call emotional independence. In social environments, people's emotional states are constantly influenced by other people's moods, reactions, and energy levels. This emotional dependency makes it difficult to maintain consistent performance and decision-making quality. Solitude teaches you to generate positive emotional states internally rather than depending on external sources. You learn to find satisfaction in your own progress, excitement in your own discoveries, and motivation from your own sense of purpose. This emotional independence makes you more resilient and more consistent in your performance. The final transformation is developing what I call compound clarity. When you spend extended time alone with your thoughts and work, you gradually develop crystal clear understanding of your objectives, values, and priorities. This clarity is impossible to achieve in social environments because other people's perspectives constantly influence and cloud your thinking. Compound clarity becomes a competitive advantage because it allows you to make decisions quickly and maintain consistent direction over long periods. While others are confused by conflicting advice and changing social pressures, you have unwavering clarity about what you're trying to achieve and why. Chapter 10. The Psychology of Delayed Gratification Mastery. The ability to delay gratification is perhaps the single most important psychological skill for achieving anything significant. Every meaningful goal requires giving up immediate pleasures in exchange for future rewards that may not materialize for months or years. Yet most people are psychologically incapable of sustained, delayed gratification because they've never learned to manage the psychological discomfort that comes with deferred rewards. Working in silence is essentially an extreme form of delayed gratification. You give up the immediate pleasure of social recognition in exchange for the eventual satisfaction of achieving meaningful results. You sacrifice the constant dopamine hits of external validation for the deeper but delayed satisfaction of genuine accomplishment. Understanding the psychology of delayed gratification is crucial because willpower alone is insufficient for sustained effort over long periods. Delayed gratification requires systematic psychological strategies that make deferred rewards feel more real, and immediate rewards feel less compelling. The first principle of delayed gratification mastery is what psychologists call temporal perspective. Most people have poor temporal perspective, meaning they experience immediate rewards as vivid and compelling, while future rewards feel abstract and uncertain. This psychological bias makes it extremely difficult to choose long-term benefits over short-term pleasures. Developing accurate temporal perspective requires regularly visualizing your future self and the consequences of your current choices. You must make future rewards feel as real and compelling as immediate rewards. This involves detailed mental rehearsal of achieving your goals, regular reflection on your long-term objectives, and conscious attention to the compound effects of daily choices. Temporal perspective also requires honestly confronting the consequences of choosing immediate gratification over delayed rewards. Most people avoid thinking about these consequences because it's psychologically uncomfortable. But accurate assessment of both paths, immediate gratification and delayed gratification, is essential for making rational long-term decisions. The second principle is what I call gratification substitution. Instead of simply denying yourself immediate pleasures, you learn to find alternative sources of immediate satisfaction that support rather than undermine your long-term goals. This involves identifying activities that provide immediate pleasure while also contributing to your future objectives. Gratification substitution might involve finding immediate pleasure in the process of skill development, rather than just the eventual results. It might involve creating short-term milestones that provide regular feelings of accomplishment within longer-term projects. It might involve developing appreciation for the effort itself, rather than just the outcomes that effort produces. The key insight behind gratification substitution is that you don't need to eliminate immediate pleasure. You just need to align immediate pleasure with long-term objectives. When you can find genuine satisfaction in productive activities, delayed gratification becomes much easier because you're not constantly fighting against your desire for immediate rewards. The third principle is developing what researchers call implementation intentions around gratification choices. Most people make gratification decisions impulsively, in the moment, when their willpower is already depleted and their judgment is compromised. Implementation intentions involve pre-deciding how you'll handle specific temptation situations before they arise. Implementation intentions might include pre-planned responses to social media urges, predetermined rewards for completing difficult tasks, or specific strategies for handling discouragement or boredom. The key is making these decisions when you're mentally fresh and motivated, rather than when you're tired and tempted. This advanced decision-making dramatically improves your ability to stick to long-term plans because you're not relying on in-the-moment willpower to make good choices. You're implementing decisions that you made when you had better judgment and stronger motivation. The fourth principle is what I call progress amplification. Most people underestimate their progress toward long-term goals because progress is often invisible on a daily basis. This invisible progress makes it psychologically difficult to continue deferring immediate gratification because the delayed rewards don't feel real or achievable. Progress amplification involves creating systems that make incremental progress more visible and psychologically rewarding. This might include detailed tracking systems, regular progress reviews, visual representations of improvement, or celebrations of process milestones, rather than just outcome achievements. The goal is to create a psychological sense of momentum and progress even when external results aren't yet visible. When you can see clear evidence that you're moving toward your goals, delayed gratification becomes easier because the future rewards feel more certain and achievable. The fifth principle is developing what psychologists call ego depletion resistance. Ego depletion is the psychological phenomenon where your willpower and self-control become weaker throughout the day as you use them to make decisions and resist temptations. Most people's delayed gratification ability deteriorates significantly when they're tired, stressed, or mentally depleted. Ego depletion resistance involves building psychological stamina through graduated challenges and developing systems that reduce the willpower required for good decisions. Instead of relying on constant willpower to resist temptations, you structure your environment and routines to minimize temptation exposure and make good choices easier. This might involve eliminating temptations from your environment, creating automatic systems that reduce decision fatigue, or scheduling your most challenging delayed gratification requirements during times when your willpower is strongest. The sixth principle is what I call compound identity development. Your ability to delay gratification is strongly influenced by your identity and self-concept. If you see yourself as someone who lacks self-control or someone who deserves immediate pleasure, delayed gratification will feel like deprivation or punishment. Compound identity development involves gradually building an identity as someone who finds satisfaction in long-term achievement rather than immediate pleasure. You consciously develop pride in your ability to defer gratification and view this ability as a core part of your character rather than a temporary sacrifice. This identity shift makes delayed gratification feel empowering rather than restrictive. Instead of feeling like you're denying yourself something good, you feel like you're expressing your values and character. The delayed gratification becomes a source of self-respect rather than self-denial. The final principle is understanding what researchers call the gratification paradox. The gratification paradox states that people who become skilled at delayed gratification actually experience more pleasure and satisfaction than people who constantly seek immediate gratification. This happens because delayed rewards are typically larger and more meaningful than immediate rewards, and because the process of earning rewards through effort creates deeper satisfaction than receiving them without effort. Understanding the gratification paradox helps you reframe delayed gratification from sacrifice to investment. You're not giving up pleasure, you're investing present effort to create greater future pleasure. You're not denying yourself rewards, you're choosing higher quality rewards that require more time to obtain. Chapter 11. The compound power of invisible systems. The difference between people who achieve extraordinary results and those who remain average isn't talent, luck, or even work ethic. It's the invisible systems they build behind the scenes that create exponential rather than linear progress. While most people focus on individual actions and daily habits, the highest achievers understand that systems are what transform effort into outcomes. When you work in silence, you have the mental space and sustained focus required to build sophisticated systems that would be impossible to develop in social environments. These systems become force multipliers that allow you to achieve results that seem impossible to outside observers who only see the final outcomes without understanding the invisible infrastructure that created them. The power of invisible systems lies in their compound nature. Each system you build makes every other system more effective. Your productivity system amplifies your learning system. Your learning system enhances your decision-making system. Your decision-making system improves your goal-setting system. Over time, these interconnected systems create a multiplicative effect, where small improvements in individual systems create massive improvements in overall results. Most people never develop real systems because system building requires extended periods of experimentation, refinement, and optimization that are incompatible with the constant social interaction and external validation seeking that characterizes normal social behavior. System building is inherently private work that produces invisible results until the systems reach a critical mass of effectiveness. The first category of invisible systems is what I call input optimization systems. These are the systems that control what information, experiences, and influences you allow into your mind. Most people are passive consumers of whatever information happens to cross their path through social media, news, conversations, and random internet browsing. This passive consumption fills their minds with irrelevant, contradictory, or actively harmful information that interferes with clear thinking and effective decision-making. Input optimization systems involve becoming extremely selective about information sources, deliberately seeking out high-quality information that supports your objectives and systematically filtering out information that doesn't serve your goals. This might involve curated reading lists, selective social media consumption, strategic podcast choices, or deliberate conversation partners. The compound effect of input optimization is enormous because the quality of your thinking is directly related to the quality of your information inputs. When you consistently consume high-quality information aligned with your goals, your thinking gradually becomes more sophisticated, your insights become more valuable, and your decisions become more effective. The second category is processing optimization systems. These are the systems that control how you analyze, synthesize, and learn from the information and experiences you encounter. Most people process information passively, allowing insights to pass through their minds without systematic capture, analysis, or integration into their existing knowledge base. Processing optimization systems involve developing systematic approaches to learning from every experience, capturing insights through writing or recording, connecting new information to existing knowledge, and regularly reviewing and synthesizing accumulated insights. This might involve structured note-taking systems, regular reflection practices, knowledge management databases, or systematic review processes. The compound effect of processing optimization means that every experience becomes a source of learning and improvement rather than just something that happens to you. Over time, this systematic processing creates deep expertise and wisdom that would be impossible to develop through passive experience alone. The third category is output optimization systems. These are the systems that control how you translate your knowledge, insights, and energy into concrete results. Most people work inefficiently because they've never systematically analyzed and optimized their work processes. They use whatever methods they learned initially, without ever examining whether those methods are actually effective. Output optimization systems involve systematically experimenting with different work methods, measuring the results of different approaches, identifying the specific techniques that produce the best results for your particular circumstances, and continuously refining your methods based on evidence rather than habit or assumption. The compound effect of output optimization means that the same amount of effort produces increasingly better results over time. Instead of just working harder, you work more intelligently, focusing your effort on the specific activities and approaches that create disproportionate results. The fourth category is feedback optimization systems. These are the systems that help you accurately assess your performance and make intelligent adjustments to your approach. Most people receive poor feedback because they rely on other people's opinions or superficial metrics that don't actually indicate real progress or effective performance. Feedback optimization systems involve developing objective measures of real progress, creating systematic review processes that identify what's working and what isn't, and establishing regular cycles of experimentation and adjustment based on evidence rather than assumptions or emotions. The compound effect of feedback optimization means that you continuously improve rather than just repeating the same approaches indefinitely. You develop the ability to self-correct and self-improve without depending on external feedback or guidance. The fifth category is energy optimization systems. These are the systems that control how you generate, conserve, and deploy your mental and physical energy for maximum effectiveness. Most people manage their energy poorly because they've never systematically studied their own energy patterns or developed deliberate practices for optimizing their performance. Energy optimization systems involve understanding your natural energy rhythms, identifying the specific activities and practices that restore versus deplete your energy, scheduling your most important work during peak energy periods, and developing systematic practices for maintaining high performance over extended periods. The compound effect of energy optimization means that you can sustain high-level performance for much longer periods than people who haven't optimized their energy management. You become capable of working at peak effectiveness for hours or days at a time, while others struggle to maintain focus for even short periods. The sixth category is decision optimization systems. These are the systems that help you make better decisions more efficiently by reducing decision fatigue, improving decision quality, and accelerating decision speed. Most people make poor decisions because they approach each decision as a unique problem rather than developing systematic approaches to common decision types. Decision optimization systems involve identifying recurring decision patterns, developing decision frameworks for common situations, creating decision criteria that align with your long-term objectives, and establishing systematic processes for major decisions that require extensive analysis. The compound effect of decision optimization means that your life trajectory improves dramatically over time because you consistently make choices that align with your objectives and values rather than making decisions based on immediate emotions or social pressures. The most powerful aspect of invisible systems is that they create what I call automated excellence. Once your systems are sufficiently developed and refined, high-level performance becomes automatic rather than requiring conscious effort. You achieve excellent results, not through constant willpower and motivation, but through systematically designed processes that naturally produce excellent outcomes. This automated excellence is what creates the appearance of effortless success in highly successful people. Outside observers see someone who seems to achieve remarkable results without struggle. But what they don't see is the sophisticated system infrastructure that makes those results inevitable rather than accidental. Chapter 12. Breaking free from the need for external validation. The addiction to external validation is perhaps the most limiting psychological dependency that ambitious people face. It's more subtle than addiction to substances because seeking approval and recognition feels like natural, healthy social behavior. But when your emotional state, motivation, and self-worth become dependent on other people's reactions, you've essentially given control of your life to external forces that you cannot predict or control. Breaking free from this dependency isn't about becoming antisocial or indifferent to other people's opinions. It's about developing the psychological independence that allows you to pursue your objectives based on your own values and judgment, rather than constantly adjusting your behavior to maintain social approval. The first step in breaking validation addiction is understanding how it develops and why it's so psychologically compelling. From early childhood, most people learn that their worth is tied to other people's approval. They receive attention and affection when they behave in ways that please others, and experience withdrawal of attention when they don't conform to social expectations. This conditioning creates deep psychological associations between social approval and safety, belonging, and self-worth. By adulthood, seeking validation feels like a survival necessity rather than a psychological choice. The brain interprets social disapproval as a threat to survival, triggering stress responses that make independent action feel dangerous and uncomfortable. Understanding this evolutionary context is important because it helps you recognize that validation seeking isn't a character flaw. It's a predictable response to evolutionary programming that's no longer adaptive in modern environments. Your discomfort with working independently isn't evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you're challenging outdated psychological programming. The second step is developing what I call validation independence through systematic desensitization. This involves gradually exposing yourself to situations where you act based on your own judgment rather than social approval, starting with low-stakes situations and gradually progressing to more significant decisions. Systematic desensitization might begin with small choices like selecting restaurants, movies, or activities based purely on your own preferences, rather than what you think others would approve of. It progresses to larger choices like career decisions, relationship decisions, or lifestyle choices made independently of social expectations. The key to systematic desensitization is starting with situations where the stakes are low enough that you can tolerate the discomfort of potential social disapproval without overwhelming anxiety. As you build confidence in your ability to make good decisions independently, you can gradually tackle situations where independence requires more psychological courage. The third step is developing what psychologists call intrinsic worth, rather than conditional worth. Conditional worth means that your self-esteem depends on meeting external standards or receiving external approval. Intrinsic worth means that your self-esteem is based on your own values, efforts, and integrity rather than other people's reactions. Developing intrinsic worth requires identifying your core values and using those values as the primary criteria for evaluating your choices and behavior. Instead of asking, "Will people approve of this?" you learn to ask, "Does this align with my values?" And, "Will this help me become the person I want to be?" This shift in evaluation criteria is psychologically challenging because it requires taking full responsibility for your choices and their consequences rather than being able to blame others for poor advice or social pressure. But this responsibility is also psychologically liberating because it means your self-worth is under your control rather than dependent on unpredictable external factors. The fourth step is understanding the hidden costs of validation, seeking that most people never calculate. These costs include the mental energy spent managing your image rather than improving your capabilities, the opportunities missed because you chose safe, socially acceptable paths rather than potentially superior unconventional paths, and the authentic relationships lost because you presented a curated version of yourself rather than your genuine personality. The most significant hidden cost is what I call life trajectory distortion. When you make major life decisions based on social approval rather than personal values and long-term objectives, you can end up living someone else's version of success rather than creating your own. You might achieve external markers of success while feeling internally empty because those markers don't align with what actually creates meaning and satisfaction for you personally. Calculating these hidden costs honestly often reveals that validation seeking is much more expensive than it initially appears. The immediate comfort of social approval comes at the price of long-term authenticity, effectiveness, and life satisfaction. The fifth step is developing what I call selective social investment. Instead of seeking validation from everyone, you learn to identify the small number of people whose opinions are actually valuable and relevant to your objectives. You invest in relationships with people who share your values, understand your goals, and can provide informed feedback rather than just emotional support or social approval. Selective social investment involves being strategic about whose validation you seek rather than craving approval from anyone who will provide it. You recognize that not all opinions are equally valuable, and that seeking validation from people who don't understand your objectives or share your values is counterproductive. This selectivity doesn't mean becoming elitist or dismissive of others. It means recognizing that your time and emotional energy are finite resources that should be invested where they can create the most value for your personal development and goal achievement. The sixth step is developing what researchers call emotional self-regulation around validation needs. This involves learning to tolerate the discomfort that comes with acting independently without immediately seeking reassurance or approval from others. Emotional self-regulation around validation involves recognizing when you're feeling the urge to seek external approval, acknowledging that feeling without immediately acting on it, and using internal resources like self-reflection, value alignment, or long-term perspective to restore emotional equilibrium. This skill is developed through practice and gradually builds your confidence in your ability to maintain emotional stability without constant external feedback. As this confidence grows, independent action becomes more comfortable and sustainable. The seventh step is understanding the paradox of validation independence. The paradox is that people who don't need external validation often receive more genuine respect and admiration than people who constantly seek it. When you demonstrate the confidence to act based on your own judgment, others perceive you as more competent and trustworthy. This paradox occurs because validation seeking signals insecurity and dependence, while validation independence signals confidence and competence. People are naturally drawn to individuals who seem secure in their own judgment because it suggests they have valuable insights and capabilities. Understanding this paradox helps motivate the difficult process of breaking validation addiction because it reveals that independence actually creates the social respect that validation seeking was intended to achieve. The final step is developing what I call contribution-based worth. Instead of deriving self-worth from social approval, you learn to derive it from the value you create for others and the progress you make toward meaningful objectives. Your sense of worth becomes tied to your contributions rather than other people's reactions to those contributions. Contribution-based worth is more sustainable than approval-based worth because it's under your control and aligned with meaningful achievement rather than superficial social dynamics. When your self-worth is based on the value you create, you naturally focus on developing capabilities and producing results rather than managing impressions. Chapter 13. The Silent Warrior's Daily Operating System. Creating sustainable excellence while working in silence requires a completely different daily operating system than the reactive, socially driven approaches that most people use to structure their days. The Silent Warrior's operating system is designed around deep work, internal metrics, and systematic progress rather than social interaction, external validation, and reactive problem solving. This operating system isn't just a schedule or a set of habits. It's a comprehensive framework that coordinates your energy, attention, priorities, and recovery to create consistent high-level performance over extended periods. It's designed to function independently of external motivation, social support, or favorable circumstances. The foundation of the Silent Warrior's operating system is what I call intentional awakening. Most people begin their days reactively, immediately checking their phones, responding to messages, or consuming news and social media. This reactive beginning sets a pattern of external responsiveness that continues throughout the day, making deep work and independent thinking difficult to achieve. Intentional awakening involves beginning each day with a period of internal orientation before engaging with any external inputs. This might include meditation, journaling, exercise, reading, or simply quiet reflection. The specific activities matter less than the principle of starting your day from internal intention rather than external reaction. This internal beginning creates what psychologists call cognitive residue, where the mental state you establish in the morning influences your cognitive performance throughout the day. When you begin with focused, intentional activities, your brain is primed for continued focus and intentionality. The second component is what I call strategic energy allocation. Instead of working randomly throughout the day or responding to whatever seems urgent, you systematically match your most important work to your peak energy periods and reserve low energy periods for routine tasks that don't require deep thinking. Strategic energy allocation requires understanding your personal energy patterns through systematic observation and experimentation. Most people have predictable periods when their mental clarity, creativity, and focus are naturally higher, but they waste these peak periods on low-value activities like email, social media, or routine administrative tasks. The Silent Warrior's operating system protects peak energy periods for the most important work, while scheduling energy-depleting activities like meetings, phone calls, and administrative tasks during naturally lower energy periods. The third component is what I call deep work blocks. These are extended periods of uninterrupted focus on your most important objectives, protected from all forms of distraction and social interaction. Deep work blocks are typically 2 to 4 hours long and involve complete disconnection from phones, internet, social media, and other people. Deep work blocks are where the real progress happens in any field that requires skill development, creative thinking, or complex problem solving. Most people never experience true deep work because they're constantly fragmenting their attention with small interruptions that prevent sustained focus. The Silent Warrior's operating system includes multiple deep work blocks per day, scheduled during peak energy periods and protected with the same intensity that most people protect important meetings or appointments. The fourth component is what I call progress tracking systems. Instead of measuring your day's success by social interactions, external recognition, or busy work completion, you systematically track progress on your most important long-term objectives using specific, measurable criteria. Progress tracking systems include daily metrics that indicate whether you're moving toward your goals, weekly reviews that assess overall progress and identify needed adjustments, and monthly evaluations that examine whether your systems and strategies are producing the desired results. These tracking systems provide the feedback and motivation that most people derive from social interaction, allowing you to maintain direction and momentum without depending on external validation or recognition. The fifth component is what I call systematic recovery. Working in silence for extended periods requires more intensive recovery practices than typical social work because you don't get the natural mental breaks that come from conversation, meetings, and social interaction. Systematic recovery includes physical practices like exercise, sleep optimization, and nutrition management, mental practices like meditation, reading, and creative activities, and emotional practices like solitude, nature exposure, and activities that provide genuine pleasure and relaxation. The key to systematic recovery is treating it as seriously as you treat your work, with specific time allocations, performance standards, and systematic improvement efforts. Recovery isn't just time off from work. It's active investment in your capacity for sustained high performance. The sixth component is what I call strategic social interaction. While the Silent Warrior minimizes social interaction during work periods, strategic social interaction involves deliberately scheduling specific types of social contact that support your objectives and well-being. Strategic social interaction might include conversations with mentors who can provide valuable guidance, collaboration with people who share your objectives, or relationships that provide emotional support and perspective. The key is being intentional about social interaction rather than using it as a distraction or procrastination tool. This intentional approach to social contact ensures that your relationships support rather than undermine your ability to work effectively in silence, while preventing the isolation and loneliness that can derail solo efforts. The seventh component is what I call adaptive optimization. The Silent Warrior's operating system includes regular evaluation and refinement processes that allow you to improve your systems based on experience and changing circumstances. Adaptive optimization involves systematic experimentation with different approaches, measurement of results from these experiments, and implementation of improvements based on evidence rather than assumptions or habits. This continuous improvement approach ensures that your operating system becomes more effective over time rather than becoming a rigid routine that loses effectiveness as your skills and circumstances change. The eighth component is what I call contingency planning. Working in silence means you can't rely on other people to help you handle obstacles, setbacks, or unexpected challenges. Your operating system must include predetermined responses to common problems that allow you to maintain momentum even when things don't go according to plan. Contingency planning involves identifying the most likely obstacles to your progress, developing specific strategies for handling each type of obstacle, and practicing these responses so they become automatic rather than requiring improvisation under stress. This preparation allows you to handle setbacks and challenges without losing momentum or becoming derailed from your long-term objectives. The ninth component is what I call purpose reinforcement. When you work in silence without regular social validation, it's easy to lose sight of why your efforts matter. Purpose reinforcement involves regular practices that reconnect you with the deeper meaning and importance of your work. Purpose reinforcement might include reviewing your long-term vision, reflecting on the impact you want to create, connecting your daily work to larger objectives, or studying examples of people who have achieved similar goals through sustained effort. This connection to purpose provides the internal motivation that sustains effort when external motivation is not available. The final component is what I call celebration systems. Most people celebrate achievements through social recognition and external validation. The Silent Warrior's operating system includes systematic celebration of progress and achievements that don't depend on other people's awareness or approval. Celebration systems might include personal rewards for achieving milestones, reflection practices that acknowledge your progress, or activities that mark significant achievements in meaningful ways. These celebration practices provide positive reinforcement for your efforts and help maintain motivation during long-term projects, where results may not be immediately visible to others. Chapter 14. Advanced Strategies for Mental Resilience. Mental resilience while working in silence requires a different psychological skill set than resilience in social environments. When you work alone for extended periods, you don't have the natural resilience boosters that come from social support, shared challenges, and external encouragement. You must develop internal resources that can sustain you through difficulties, setbacks, and the inevitable periods of doubt and discouragement that accompany ambitious solo work. The first advanced strategy is what I call cognitive armor development. This involves systematically building mental models and thought patterns that protect you from the psychological attacks that undermine solo work efforts. These attacks usually come from your own mind in the form of self-doubt, comparison to others, fear of failure, or questioning whether your efforts are worthwhile. Cognitive armor development begins with understanding the predictable patterns of negative thinking that arise during solo work. These patterns include catastrophic thinking about potential failures, comparative thinking about other people's apparent success, perfectionist thinking that makes any imperfection feel like complete failure, and victim thinking that blames external circumstances for internal problems. Once you understand these patterns, you can develop specific counter-arguments and alternative perspectives that neutralize their psychological impact. This isn't positive thinking or self-deception. It's rational analysis that provides accurate perspective during periods when your thinking becomes distorted by stress, fatigue, or isolation. Cognitive armor includes prepared responses to common internal attacks like, "You're not making progress fast enough," "Other people are more successful than you," "You don't have what it takes," or "This effort isn't worth it." Having rational, evidence-based responses to these thoughts allows you to quickly restore accurate perspective without being derailed by temporary negative thinking. The second strategy is what I call stress inoculation training. This involves deliberately exposing yourself to controlled stress and discomfort while practicing resilience skills, gradually building your capacity to maintain performance under increasingly difficult conditions. Stress inoculation might involve deliberately choosing harder projects than necessary, setting tight deadlines that create productive pressure, working in less than ideal conditions, or practicing important skills when you're tired or distracted. The principle behind stress inoculation is that resilience is built through experience with manageable challenges rather than through avoiding all stress and discomfort. When you practice maintaining performance under controlled stress, you develop confidence in your ability to handle unexpected stress that naturally arises in ambitious work. Stress inoculation also includes mental rehearsal of difficult scenarios. Imagining how you would respond to setbacks, failures, or unexpected obstacles. This mental preparation reduces the psychological shock of actual difficulties and helps you respond more effectively when challenges arise. The third strategy is developing what psychologists call psychological flexibility. This is the ability to adapt your mental approach based on changing circumstances while maintaining core objectives and values. Most people become psychologically rigid when working alone, sticking to approaches that aren't working because they lack external input that might suggest alternative strategies. Psychological flexibility involves regularly questioning your assumptions about what methods are necessary or effective, experimenting with different approaches to the same objectives, and being willing to change strategies based on results rather than attachment to particular methods. This flexibility extends to emotional regulation, where you learn to adapt your emotional responses based on what's most effective for the situation, rather than simply reacting based on immediate feelings. Sometimes situations require optimism and enthusiasm. Sometimes they require sober realism and careful analysis. And sometimes they require patient persistence despite temporary setbacks. The fourth strategy is what I call adversity reframing. Instead of viewing setbacks, failures, and obstacles as problems to be avoided, you learn to see them as valuable information and opportunities for development that are essential parts of any meaningful achievement process. Adversity reframing involves developing the mental habit of asking productive questions when things go wrong. What can I learn from this? How can this make me stronger? What opportunities might this create? How can I use this experience to improve my approach? This reframing doesn't mean becoming unrealistically positive about genuine problems. It means focusing your mental energy on productive responses rather than dwelling on the negative aspects of difficult situations. Adversity reframing also includes understanding that all significant achievements involve periods of struggle, confusion, and apparent lack of progress. These periods aren't signs that you're doing something wrong. They're normal parts of the achievement process that require persistence rather than course correction. The fifth strategy is developing what I call internal anchor points. These are core beliefs, values, and identity elements that remain stable regardless of external circumstances or temporary results. When you work in silence, you don't have the external anchors that most people use to maintain psychological stability during difficult periods. Internal anchor points might include commitment to specific values like integrity or excellence, belief in your capacity for growth and learning, or identity as someone who persists through difficulties. These anchor points provide psychological stability when external results are disappointing or uncertain. The strength of your internal anchor points determines how much external turbulence you can tolerate without losing psychological equilibrium. Strong anchor points allow you to maintain perspective and continue productive effort, even when results are slow, feedback is absent, or progress is unclear. The sixth strategy is what I call resilience cycling. This involves understanding that resilience isn't a constant state, but a dynamic process that requires regular renewal through specific practices and experiences. Resilience cycling includes recognition that your psychological resources naturally fluctuate based on factors like energy levels, recent experiences, and external stresses. Instead of expecting constant resilience, you learn to recognize when your resilience is low and take specific actions to restore it. Resilience restoration might involve physical practices like exercise or sleep, mental practices like meditation or reading, emotional practices like solitude or creative activities, or spiritual practices like reflection on purpose and meaning. The seventh strategy is developing what researchers call post-traumatic growth mindset. This involves viewing difficult experiences not just as obstacles to overcome, but as opportunities for developing capabilities and perspectives that wouldn't be possible without those challenges. Post-traumatic growth mindset includes appreciation for the ways that working through difficulties develops psychological strength, wisdom, and empathy that become valuable resources for future challenges. You learn to see your capacity to handle difficulty as one of your most valuable assets, rather than viewing difficulties as purely negative experiences. The eighth strategy is what I call resilience community building. Even though you work primarily in silence, building relationships with other people who understand and support your approach to achievement provides psychological resources that sustain long-term effort. Resilience community doesn't require daily social interaction, but it does require having access to people who understand your objectives, respect your methods, and can provide perspective during particularly challenging periods. This community might include mentors who have achieved similar goals, peers who are pursuing similar paths, or even historical figures whose writings and examples provide inspiration and guidance during difficult periods. Chapter 15. Becoming the person who gets results in silence. The ultimate goal of working in silence isn't just to achieve specific objectives. It's to transform yourself into the type of person who consistently produces meaningful results without needing external validation, motivation, or support. This transformation involves fundamental changes in how you think about work, success, relationships, and your own capabilities. Becoming the person who gets results in silence requires understanding that this isn't just a temporary strategy for achieving particular goals. It's a comprehensive approach to life that affects every area of your development. The psychological skills you develop through sustained solo work create advantages that extend far beyond the specific projects you complete in isolation. The first aspect of this transformation is developing what I call outcome independence. This means deriving satisfaction from the quality of your effort and the integrity of your process, rather than from external results or recognition. Outcome independence doesn't mean you don't care about results. It means your emotional stability and motivation aren't dependent on achieving specific outcomes within specific timeframes. Outcome independence is psychologically liberating because it allows you to take risks, experiment with new approaches, and pursue ambitious objectives without the paralyzing fear of failure that limits most people's efforts. When your sense of worth isn't tied to immediate results, you can maintain effort through the inevitable periods of slow progress or temporary setbacks that accompany meaningful work. This independence also allows you to pursue objectives that might take years to achieve, because you're not dependent on regular external validation to maintain motivation. You can work toward goals that won't be understood or appreciated by others until they're completed, giving you access to opportunities and approaches that social workers cannot pursue. The second aspect is developing what researchers call intrinsic motivation mastery. This is the ability to find genuine satisfaction in the process of improvement, creation, and achievement itself, independent of external rewards or recognition. Intrinsic motivation mastery involves developing appreciation for the subtle satisfactions that come from skill development, problem solving, and meaningful contribution. You learn to find pleasure in small improvements, insight from difficult challenges, and purpose in working toward objectives that matter to you personally. This internal source of motivation is infinitely more sustainable than external motivation because it's under your control and available in any circumstances. External motivation depends on other people's attention and approval, which are unreliable and often absent during the most important periods of your work. The third aspect is developing what I call strategic patience mastery. This involves maintaining long-term perspective and consistent effort even when progress feels slow or results are invisible to outside observers. Strategic patience mastery includes understanding that all meaningful achievements require extended periods of effort before results become visible. Accepting that most improvement happens gradually rather than suddenly, and maintaining faith in your process, even when you can't see immediate evidence of progress. This patience allows you to pursue strategies and objectives that require years of development, giving you access to achievements that are impossible for people who need constant, visible progress to maintain motivation. The fourth aspect is developing comprehensive self-reliance. This doesn't mean avoiding all help or collaboration. It means having the psychological resources to maintain direction and effort without depending on other people for motivation, guidance, or emotional support. Comprehensive self-reliance includes the ability to make decisions confidently, based on your own judgment, maintain emotional equilibrium without constant social interaction, find solutions to problems through your own resources and research, and sustain motivation through internal rather than external sources. This self-reliance makes you more valuable in collaborative situations because you contribute strength rather than needing support, and it makes you capable of pursuing objectives that don't have established social support systems. The fifth aspect is developing what I call authentic confidence. This is confidence based on actual capabilities and demonstrated results rather than social validation or positive self-talk. Authentic confidence is built through repeatedly choosing difficult challenges, working through them systematically, and observing your ability to handle whatever difficulties arise. Each time you successfully complete a challenging project in silence, you develop deeper confidence in your ability to handle future challenges. This confidence is more stable than socially derived confidence, because it's based on evidence of your actual capabilities rather than other people's opinions, which can change unpredictably based on factors beyond your control. The sixth aspect is developing what researchers call creative independence. This is the ability to generate original ideas, solutions, and approaches without needing constant input, validation, or collaboration from others. Creative independence involves learning to trust your own insights and intuitions, developing your own standards of quality and effectiveness, and having confidence in your ability to solve problems through individual effort and research. This independence allows you to pursue innovative approaches that might be discouraged or dismissed in social environments, giving you access to breakthrough solutions that are unavailable to people who depend on group consensus for creative direction. The seventh aspect is developing what I call impact orientation. This involves focusing your efforts on creating meaningful results and value rather than on managing your image, maintaining relationships, or seeking recognition. Impact orientation means measuring your success by the actual difference you make rather than by social metrics like popularity, recognition, or approval. You become primarily interested in solving real problems and creating genuine value rather than in appearing successful or impressive to others. This orientation naturally leads to more meaningful work because you're optimizing for substance rather than appearance, and it creates more sustainable satisfaction because it's based on accomplishment rather than social validation. The eighth aspect is developing what I call systematic excellence. This involves building internal standards of quality that are higher than what most people expect or demand, and consistently meeting those standards regardless of whether anyone else notices or appreciates the effort. Systematic excellence includes attention to details that others might consider unnecessary, commitment to quality that exceeds external requirements, and pride in craftsmanship that exists independent of recognition or reward. This commitment to excellence becomes a source of deep personal satisfaction and creates compounding advantages over time as your consistently high standards produce consistently superior results. The final aspect of becoming the person who gets results in silence is understanding that this transformation creates a completely different relationship with success itself. Instead of success being something you chase or achieve, it becomes something you embody through your daily practices and approach to work. When you've developed the psychological capabilities to work effectively in silence, success becomes less about reaching specific external milestones and more about maintaining the character and practices that naturally produce meaningful results over time. You become successful not by achieving particular goals, but by becoming the type of person who consistently creates value and achieves objectives regardless of circumstances. This transformation is permanent because it's based on developed capabilities rather than external conditions. Once you've learned to work effectively in silence, to find satisfaction in meaningful effort, and to maintain direction without external validation, these capabilities remain available regardless of what specific challenges or opportunities you encounter in the future. The person who gets results in silence has developed the ultimate competitive advantage, the ability to produce meaningful outcomes regardless of external support, recognition, or favorable circumstances. This makes you anti-fragile. In a world where most people's performance depends on external factors beyond their control.